it's so frustrating to do a weave and realize you didn't cut your cord long enough and you're not going to be able to finish it. What I have for you today is I'm going to show you my method of never letting this happen. I'm going to give you the one piece of advice that no one ever gave me. So stick around. Greetings, everyone. Steve, Paracords of Kindness. How are you doing today? Hopefully your weaving's been happy. Okay. First things first. Shameless plug as always. This is a stitched Ultron. If you want to know how to do the stitching and the bracelets, 2 separate videos. I'll put the link in the cards and the description below. This one is a stitched concrete jungle. I'll put the link to this one in the cards and the description below. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, how many times have you ever began a weave, measured out the cord, set up your cord strands, you get to weaving, and you get down here to the end and you realize not enough cord? I know, it's one of the most frustrating things in the world of paracording. Because, yes, you got the experience of doing the weave, practicing the weave, but you don't actually have a product to show for your work, and you can't sell a half-woven bracelet. And, frankly, to be honest, I'm not going to unweave this and reuse this cord to make another bracelet, because it's all kinked up now. So, it's kind of a waste. Now, I know some people will unweave it and use the cord. I'll use it for scrap cord or practice cord or that things, but I'm not going to turn around and reuse that cord on a product that I potentially may sell. But that's just me. But I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you the one piece of advice that no one ever gave me. I've talked about this in quite a few of my videos here and there, but I've never actually made this video specifically dedicated to this topic. I'm going to throw out some information. For all those who are new, pay attention. Take notes. That's a joke. You'll get it in a minute. For those who've been doing this for a while, stick around. I may throw something out there that you've never thought of, that you didn't know, you've never considered, or you might just tips, tricks, and insights. As always, my experience, I hope everyone can learn from the mistakes I've made. But with that said, okay, let's see. I tell this to people all the time. I see questions in the Facebook groups and all the different social medias. I often see people ask, how much cord do I need for such and such? Right? And I often see responses of, well, approximately 1 foot of cord per inch of weave. Well, I'm going to go ahead and tell you, no, that is wrong. That information is incorrect because you don't have enough data in there. Now, when it comes to your basic Cobra bar, Solomon weave, Cobra weave, whatever you want to call it, that's a good starting point. 1 foot of cord for 1 inch of weave. That's a good point. But what if you're not doing this? Does that same formula apply? Most likely not. So that's why I say that's not a good piece of information. Now, if you're doing a Cobra bar, no problem. That'll work most of the time. And it adds you a little extra for the core strands, and so you actually have some on the end to work with to back weave it and finish it. But for all these other weaves that are out there, that's not, no. Okay. Now, with that said, there's a lot of methods on how to figure out the amount of cord. Some people will say this. I'll show you this. What they'll say And then I do this every now and then. But most of the time, I'll give you the method that I use most of the time. But this will work, and people suggest this. They'll say, take you some scrap cord, set it up. You know how much cord you've got. Measure your length of your cord before you start. Begin weaving. Weave you an inch or maybe 2 inches, and then mark how much of the cord you've used. And then unweave it and look to see how much cord you used to weave 1 or 2 inches, whatever the case may be. And then just do the math. Okay? It took me 2 feet of cord to weave 1 inch. So if I need a bracelet that's going to be 8 inches long, you do the math and figure it out, right? Or this is the way I most often do it. I take notes. Take notes. I tell this to people all the time. Take notes. Take notes. It seems like obvious information, but I know from experience, and I see people all the time do this, and it's like they never thought, just like me, I never thought to take notes when I did this stuff. I just simply, I'll give an analogy. Everybody wants to be the cop and chase the bad guys down the street and have to shoot out and all that kind of stuff, but nobody wants to go back to the office and fill out the paperwork. Well, if you want to get good at this and learn and experience and all that, paperwork is where most of it is. Most of it comes from the paperwork. Okay, now with that said, what I do, I talked about this in other videos, but what I do, most of the time you will see these tutorials on YouTube, and they will give you the length of cord they used. And now also, most of the time, all of them, well, I ain't going to say all of them, but about 99% of them will give you the length of cord they used. And then most of those videos also will tell you it's kind of confusing and ambiguous, but they'll tell you the wrist size or the bracelet length. Sometimes they don't clarify which, because that's 2 different measurements. But they'll tell you, you know what I'm saying? I'm using 10 feet of cord for an 8-inch bracelet, right? That way, you know. And if you're making a bracelet shorter than 8 feet, you probably ain't going to need the 10 feet of cord. Or 8 inches of bracelet shorter than 8 inches bracelet, probably going to not need the 10 feet of cord, right? But I know from my experience, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, you cut that amount of cord, and then you go to weave it, and this happens. And I know for me it happened a lot in the beginning. Why? Because of my weaving style. And I say this to everybody. The numbers I give in my video are from my personal weaving style. I ain't going to say I tend. I will push, here, I'll show you. When I'm weaving, I will push this up toward that buckle as much as I can, and I will pull these cords as tight as I can. What that tends to do is cause me to need more cord than the measurements most of those YouTube videos give. Make sense? And I know people have watched my tutorials and they see that length of cord and go, wow, that's a lot. Well, you may not weave like I do, but the way I weave, it tends to use more cord. And because of that, I've learned through experience what I'm going to tell you. Okay. What I'll do, this is the way I do this. I'll watch a video the first time. This is the first time that I ever do a weave. Let's say, for example, the concrete jungle. Let's pretend I've never made one. I don't know anything about it. And I find a video for this on YouTube. And he gives measurements. Let's just make it simple. He says you need 10 feet of gray paracord to do this bracelet. Okay? You know what I do? I add about 5 feet to that. I started off adding a standard of 3 feet to the measurements anybody gave. But I found out that always wasn't enough. So I would add, now this is standard, 5 feet. If they give 7 feet, I'm cutting 12 feet. If they give 10 feet, I'm cutting 15 feet. But that's me. That's my weaving style. Now, the more you do it, that 5 feet, you may not need to do 5 feet, but that's what I do. Why? Because I want to have enough cord that does not happen. Now, people will say, but you're going to waste all that cord if you don't need it. No. The cost of this cord is not that much. I mean, sit down and think about it. Let's say, for example, rough estimate. It costs, not even, but just say, you buy 100 feet of cord for $10. And I know that depending on where you get it, it may cost less or more, but we're just going to make it simple. 10 or 100 feet of cord for $10. That comes out to 10 cents a foot. Let's say you overestimate and you got 3 feet. That's 30 cents. That's not that much. But here's the key point. This is the point. Take notes, take notes, take notes. That first time, this is the key. The first time you do that bracelet, the first time I made a concrete jungle, say you said 10 feet, I cut 15 feet. I will make a recipe card, a note card. You know, I use 3x5 index cards is what I use. Now, granted, I am and currently going through and putting these in digital format in an online storage place. And it's all this information that I have on these cards. And, you know, I know a lot of us grew up and we had a mother who had a little box like this full of recipe cards, index cards that she had her recipes for all the different stuff she cooked. Same principle. But I'm putting a recipe for a paracord bracelet on it, right? And this is not all of them. I got a bunch over here. I got a little holder on my desk full of these things. But what I'll do, I'll show you the information that I put on these cards. Oh, okay. I was like, where is that card? I got one right here. This is what I put on here. Now, like I say, this is the first time I make the bracelet. I will overestimate how much cord I need. If they say 10 feet, I make it 15 feet. And before I even start the weave, I will make this card. That's the most important thing. Because if you try to come back afterwards, you're going to forget. I know, I've done it, I've done it. You forget, you're like, well, how much did I cut? Or you'll just totally forget to make the card. And then down the road, it bites you, right? Make the card first. I will pull out the card. And what I'll do, I'm going to zoom in. Now, my handwriting's not the best, but you'll get the idea of what I do right here. I will write this out. Most of the time I use 550 cord. So I write 550. Template. That's where I put the name of the bracelet, the name of the weave. And I'm doing this for my wrist, which is a 7-inch wrist. And this +2, that add 2. Like I tell everybody, remember this formula. Wrist measurement plus add 2 equals jig measurement. We all know that you can't take what your wrist is, a 7-inch wrist, and measure your jig out 7 inches and make a bracelet and expect it to fit. It's not going to. Why? Because you have to take into consideration how thick the bracelet is. And that variable, that add 2 number, is different for every specific bracelet. Because every bracelet is slightly thicker or less thicker or thinner. Does that make sense? So write that down. Some of the YouTube tutorials will give you that information. Now, granted, that also is dependent upon the weaving style, how you actually weave that bracelet together. I know over here, under there, and all that, the mechanics. But sometimes I will weave some of these bracelets and they'll say, you need to add 2 inches. Well, when I get done weaving it, I didn't need 2 inches because I wove it in such a way as that it turned out thinner than the tutorial I was getting the instructions from, right? So that number's always slightly different, but that's another data point on there. Top cord, name, wrist measurement, and I add 2. And then this is the information right here. I'll write down, let me zoom back in so you can see. I'll write down, now you don't have to do this, but I do this because I usually try to mention that I give credit where credit's due when I make a YouTube video. I'll put down, if I can find the information, sometimes you don't know who was the original designer of that weave. Makes sense? Next piece of information I put on right here is the buckle size. Now I'll go ahead and tell you, I very rarely use a 1/2 inch or a 3/8 inch buckle. I either use a 5/8 or a 3/4. That's the 2 sizes I use most often. And I'll show you the reason I do that. Let me zoom out. The reason I do that is I try to keep the width of the buckle itself proportionate to the width of the bracelet. And when I say that, I don't mean exactly like how this one is pretty much the width of this bracelet is almost the same width of the buckle. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about I will see people, and if you do this, I ain't trying to hurt your feelings, step on your toes, or offend you. Think about it. I will see people make a bracelet like this one right here. Here's a perfect example. I did this on purpose so you could see this. You see how this cobra bar is it's narrow, and then this buckle's real wide. The buckle is oversized for that bracelet. It's disproportionate. That's what I'm talking about. Having a big old oversized buckle on this little narrow bracelet. It does not look right to me. That's my personal opinion. Maybe you like it, but it's just, it doesn't look right. You don't want the buckle to be wider than the bracelet because it looks strange. So I try to keep that, and I don't always get it right. But if it's a narrow bracelet, I'll use a 5/8 inch buckle. If it's a wider bracelet, I'll use a 3/4 inch buckle. Does that make sense? That's what I write that down. And in some of these bracelets, you can use either one. You can use either size. But that's personal preference. It's all personal preference, right? Okay, there's that. Now, the next piece of information I put on here is the core. How I set up the core. 2-strand, 4-strand, 6-strand, independent core. Even working ends, offset, accent. Offset working ends, even accent, that kind of stuff. I just put that information on there. That just helps me remember when I go to make it again. But the most important information is right here. Your cord length. That's the information. If you don't do any of this stuff up here, that's fine. But this is the most important part, the length of cord. And I usually label these as core, as in, let me find one of these bracelets. Like this one on my wrist, this one right here. You say how you can see the core strands or the maroon that the bracelet is. And in that gray, I would consider that the accent. Now, if you got one of these bracelets that's got all kind of 4 or 5 different colors, I get it. you write all that down on here. But normally, you got a core strand and then an accent. Second accent, third accent, that kind of thing. And a lot of times when I first do it, I'll write down, obviously, the length I've cut, but then I'll put the color. That way I can look back at the bracelet and know the orientation. I know which, if I want this one to be this color, does that mean it just helps you organize it? I won't go to explaining it. But the most important thing is write it down. They say use 10 feet of maroon, I cut 15. Write down on that piece of paper, 15 feet maroon. The gray in the middle, 5 feet. I'm going to add 5 to that and make it 10 feet of gray. Write that down before I do the bracelet. Like I say, I do this before I even attempt, before I cut cord, before I get the jig out, before I do anything, I make a recipe card. All this information that I add to, a lot of times I just guess. But it's an educated guess because I watch the videos. Most of the time in them videos, if they don't give you that measurement, they'll hold it up there and go, ooh, look at the pretty bracelet I made. How good am I? But that split second when they turn it to the side, pause the video and look how thick it is. That's what I do. And I've done this long enough that I usually get it right about right. And if not, I adjust my numbers. But that's the whole point. You write all this information down. Then you make the bracelet. And when you get done and you go to cut and burn all your excess, your slack, your scrap off, maybe that 5 feet you added to it, you didn't need to. Maybe you only needed 1 foot extra. Or maybe just say, they told you 10 feet, but you cut 15 feet. You write 15 feet down. And when you get done, you didn't even need that. All you needed was 7 feet. So you got this big old long piece of scrap. Well, guess what? After you cut it off and burn, you take those pieces of scrap and you measure how long they are. And you figure out, give yourself, if I've got a piece of scrap after I've made the first time, remember, this is the first time you do that weave. You got a 5 feet piece of scrap. After you cut it, I will change it. And instead of 5 feet, because I'll give myself that extra foot. That way I have something to work with at the end. And plus, if I'm going to make a bracelet bigger than 7 inches, that extra foot is kind of a cushion to make sure I don't run out. Does that make sense? So instead of 5 feet, that scrap piece, 4 feet. I consider it a 4 foot piece. So what I do is I go back to my note card where I wrote 15 feet, and after the fact, I realized, well, I only needed 11 feet. So I changed the 15. I mark it out, and I put 11 feet. And I do that with every cord. The gray cord, the micro cord, everything. If the add to was too much or too little, I change it. I change it. I amend my note card. That way, that 4 or 5 feet of excess that I had, it won't happen on the next bracelet. It only happens that one time. The next time I make it, I pull out my recipe card, and guess what? I don't have to go, how much cord did I use last time? How did I figure that out? I've got a recipe card. I guarantee you, as you do this, you think, well, I don't want to do all this quote-unquote paperwork. I just want to chase the bad guys and have the shootout. Well, guess what? Your aim will get better with paperwork. I guarantee you, the more you do it and the more you write this stuff down, it will help you improve in your experience. And over time, you'll have recipe cards for all kind of stuff. And when one of your friends sees some random bracelet you got hanging over there on your display rack, they say, hey man, can you make me one like that? You don't have to go, you know, in the back of your head, You just go over there and go, yeah, there it is right there. There's all my measurements. There's my recipe. And you can go make it. Does that make sense? That's what I do. I tell people this all the time, and it frustrates them because nobody wants to do the paperwork aspect of it. But that's how you get better at this. Obviously, yeah, you get experience from doing it, but you writing this stuff down, because no, I don't remember all this. Somebody said something the other day, how can you memorize all this? How do you know? I don't. I take notes. And I'll go ahead and tell you this too. Like this weave right here. I don't remember the mechanics of how to do this. The overs and the unders. But I've got pictorials and I've got videos. And I can always go refresh my memory. That's what I try to tell people. It's not the mechanics of over here, under there. It's how I tighten it up. That's what I try to remember. I can always go back and rewatch a YouTube video. If it's some bracelet that I hadn't made in 6-7 months and I'm like, oh, I don't remember how to do that. Well, first off, I got notes on telling me how much cord and add to and all that information. I got all the ingredients. Then I just go look at the video and give myself a refresher and make it. But like I say, that first time I do it, yeah, I may have some scrap pieces that are long. I made one the other day, and it was this bracelet right here, a double wide Widowmaker. It wasn't this specific one, but I made one the other day, and I'd never made this thing before. That's the back of it. I never made this thing before, and I overestimated. Whoa. And when I started weaving, man, I had cord everywhere. That's what took me so long to make the thing, because I had so much cord I was fighting with. But when I got done, I realized, okay, that was way too much. But I went back on my recipe card and I amended all the numbers. That way, when I made the second one, which is this one, it was so much easier because I didn't have all that excess cord. Makes sense? That's what I tell people. Take notes. And this is what I mean. Take notes. Credit, you don't necessarily have to do that. I do it because I make YouTube videos and I usually try to mention buckle size. I told you why. Core. 4-strand, 2-strand, 6-strand, and then kind of the basic setup of how it's done. But the cord lengths, wrist size, add to, and the cord length, or cord lengths, the measurement of the cords I've cut. Write that down. And when you get done, you go back and you change them. And if you overestimate, like me, like I say, I add, if they say 10 feet, I'm cutting 15 feet. And it's very rare that this ever happens to me. And like I say, yeah, I may have overcut by 4 feet of cord. That was 40 cents. But guess what? It won't happen again because I wrote it down. That first one is always trial and error. Experiment. And once you do it and you get them numbers, you're good to go and you can redo it. I mean, that's the best piece of advice that no one ever gave me. Take notes before you make the bracelet. The first time you ever make whatever specific weave, write down your numbers. Make it, and then go back and change the numbers to be more accurate. But always overestimate the amount of cord you need. That way you can finish the thing. Makes sense? That's the best piece of advice nobody ever gave me. And I'm telling you, I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done this, and I look back at it, and I think, I'm so glad I do this. Because I have people say, hey, can you make me one of those? And I'm like, yeah. I just grab my recipe card and pull it out and look at it and go to it. And I can make it. No problem. I don't fumble through the trying to recreate something I've already done. Hopefully that helps. Hopefully somewhere in there you got something out of that. But like I say, take notes. Take notes. That's a lot of people in the paracord community, you don't hear them talk about this. A lot of them do it. The ones that sell this, sell their projects, they do this. They don't talk about it, but they do it. They'll just tell you, take notes. Well, specifically, that's what I do. Size of the wrist, which is usually mine, that add to variable. Like I say, wrist measurement plus the add to equals the jig measurement. Right? And the amount of cord. And then you amend it afterwards to better reflect a more accurate measurement. Hopefully that helped. But with that, I'll end this one like I end them all. Keep it neat, keep it clean, keep it tight. Happy weaving, folks.